This is lesson 1.2, selection and snapping. The objectives of this lesson are to learn how to select and deselect objects, learn how to use keyboard shortcuts to speed up drawing, learn how to use snapping in Vectorworks, and learn how to control snaps and the snapping palette. Let's get back to Vectorworks. You'll need the file from the previous lesson with the 3 rectangles. If you haven't got the 3 rectangles, then create them again. I'll just quickly create them so you can remember how we did it. The first one was just a rectangle using the first mode, and if we went to the object info palette we could make that 50 millimeters or 2 inches, or 50 millimeters and 2 inches that way. We set our insertion point to 0 and 0. We created another rectangle using our floating data bar, which was 2 inches or 50 millimeters, minus 2 inches or minus 50 millimeters, enter once, enter again. And the final way we did it was to double click so that we could type in the size, choose our box position or our insertion point, and click once. That gives us our objects, so now we can start to look at selecting and deselecting. So when we're using Vectorworks, we're going to use this tool to select objects, the selection tool. When we move near an object, our cursor will change shape. You might notice at the moment that my cursor is a black arrow with a little black tail on it. Now if you're on a Windows machine, that will be a white arrow, but it'll still have the tail. When we move near an object, we lose the little tail and it just becomes an arrowhead. This tells us that Vectorworks can see the object underneath. You'll also notice that the object underneath is highlighted in orange. This is the pre-selection color. If I click once, that object is now selected. If I move to the next object and click, it selects the second object, but the first one is no longer selected. If I put my finger on the Shift key, notice the cursor changes color, then I can click, and now I've got 2 objects selected, and if I move away, you can see that I've got 2 rectangles. So if you want to select multiple objects, you can hold down the Shift key and keep clicking on the next object. Now if you've got a large drawing, that can be quite slow, so we need another way. The other way is to hold our mouse down, so we just hold down the mouse button, drag this marquee, and as we totally enclose an object, it becomes pre-selected. Come down to here, and you can see it's pre-selected those 2 items. Now when I let go of my mouse button, those 2 objects will be selected. And there they are, 2 objects. Now it does look at the moment as if I've got 3 objects selected. You notice I've got 2 objects and then there's an orange around the third one. Watch when I move my cursor away. You notice the second one is no longer selected. But if you look just up here, you'll see that it says 2 rectangles, even though I'm pre-selecting the 3rd rectangle. So just look out for that, because it's not actually selected, but you might be fooled into thinking that it is. If I hold my Option key on a Macintosh or the Alt key on a Windows machine, as I touch objects, they become selected. So now when I let go of my mouse button, 3 objects are selected, 3 rectangles, and it says on my Object Info palette, 3 rectangles. So that's one way of selecting objects. Now when you've got too many things selected, you can hold down the Shift key and you can click on an object that you do not want to be selected. If you start off by selecting an object and you hold down the Shift key and drag your marquee across those objects, you'll find that the object currently selected becomes deselected. This is standard if you think about it. The Shift key selects objects, selects the next objects, deselects objects, so maybe that's what's happening when you do this. If you've come from AutoCAD, you might be thinking, well, if I drag a marquee that way it'll do one thing, and if I drag it from this direction it'll do something different. No. You just have to use the modifier key, the Option on the Macintosh or the Alt on a Windows machine. So that's a little bit about selecting and deselecting. It's really important that you learn how to select objects, because without it, we can't do all the other stuff. I'd like to talk to you now about keyboard shortcuts. Some people like to use keyboard shortcuts. You don't have to, but if you're interested in learning how to speed up your Vectorworks drawing, learning some keyboard shortcuts can be very useful. Some of the tools, like the text tool here, have a hotkey. In this case, it's key number 1 on your keyboard. See in the brackets it's got text and a number 1. What about the selection tool? It's the X key. Pan is H, zoom is C, and so on. So if you wanted to change to the text tool, you could hit key number 1. If you want to change to the line tool, that's key number 2. This is key number 5, so I can hit key number 5. Key number 9 is walls. And so if you learn a few of these, it will really speed up the way you draw. Another hotkey is the control of these modes. This is called a mode group. There are 4 modes here and then a vertical line. So that's called a mode group, which is controlled by the U key on your keyboard. The next key, I key, controls the next group of modes. The O key does the next group. The P key does the group after that, which in this case is wall preferences. That one there. So that's another bunch of hotkeys that you could use to speed up your drawing. So when we go to the selection tool, we could hit the U key and that would change us between different settings. Now one of these will disable the interactive scaling mode. It's the first mode on the toolbar for the selection tool. And you have to tell it whether or you have to tell Vectorworks whether or not you want to accept this. U key again, back to that one. So you'll notice in this case, with this second mode, the single object interactive scaling, I don't get handles on multiple objects. If I go to the next mode, I do. That allows me to interactively scale them together. We've already looked at the cursor shape when it's got the arrow with the tail and when it's got the arrow without the tail. But I'd also like to look at some of these other ones, like this cursor shape, which is the snap cursor. This is an extremely useful and very accurate way to move objects. Even though I'm not right on the corner of that object, if I click and drag that object, I can touch another object and they will snap together perfectly. So just remember that. I'm just going to undo that, put that back where it was. If you need to undo things, edit, undo, I often use this keyboard shortcut, Control Z or Command Z. So we've had that cursor shape, the move cursor shape, the snap cursor shape, and now the final one I want to show you, when you move right on top of one of those blue handles, the interactive scaling cursor, allowing you to move or change the size of an object. I'll put that back the way it is. So I'll just undo that. So those 4 cursor shapes are very important. In fact, when you use tools in Vectorworks, look out for the cursor shape changing. Vectorworks is trying to warn you what's going on, so it's quite important that you look at it. When I go near an object, I get my move cursor and I get my snapping cursor. And Vectorworks is snapping to the top left, top center, center, and so on of these objects. But what controls that? The thing that controls it is the snapping palette. The snapping palette allows you to snap to the grid, which is great if you've got a good grid set. You can snap to an object, which is what we've just been looking at. When you move objects, I don't know if you noticed, but when I moved that object, I ended up with a guideline. This guideline here, that's a smart cursor guideline. A line V, that's another smart cursor guideline. So I get several guides that come up. This angle snap is a great guide. It allows you to make sure that your lines are going in the right direction or they're constrained to certain angles. This will find intersections. So if I go near the intersection of 2 objects, top center is already there, but if I had gone there, I would have got that as well. This is my smart cursor settings. So the smart points, or the smart cursor, is the part that allows you to touch a point like that and then line up with it. So you can line up with objects, which really speeds up your drawing. It's a really dramatic speed up if you can learn how to use that. So let's look at these in detail. Snap to grid, if I double click on this, it will open a dialog box where I can put in my grid settings. And I can suspend snapping by holding the back quote key. It's the one at the top left hand corner of your keyboard. So here I've got a grid. Now generally I use a grid of 4 inches, 100 millimeters, and 3 feet or a meter if I'm working with a metric file. I like to show the grid, and I'll show you in a minute why I do that. So let's go back out of that. So why do I like to show the grid? So that when I change to a three-dimensional view, right isometric, I can see the grid. If I turn that grid off, I won't always be able to see where my objects are. If I double click on that again, and if I show the 3D axes with the labels, then I'll know exactly where I am, where X, Y, and Z or Z are. When I'm drawing, I turn off the snap to grid. Let's have a look at snap to object. Double click on that. I'm going to say don't show this dialog again, because every time I double click on one of these snaps, this is going to come up if I don't do that. So when I snap to an object, I want to snap to the end of the object, the midpoint, the center point, master snaps. When you're dimensioning, you might feel that it's easier if you turn off those parts so you don't accidentally snap to a center point or an insertion point. But when you're designing, it's quite handy to have those all turned on. So that's our snap to object. That's this one here. This is our angle snaps, this one. So if we click on angle, we're constraining to 45, 30, and if I put in a semicolon type 15, I can snap to 15 degrees. I'm working on a project at the moment which has got a grid line which is parallel to the boundary. The angle is 80.53 degrees, something weird. But anyway, having that is a great way of giving me snaps that are on that alternate coordinate system so that I can easily draw parallel to that grid line. I'm going to turn that off because I don't need it. Smart points. This is our smart points here, this one here. So you can acquire the smart point if the mouse stops for half a second. Now as you get quicker in Vectorworks, you'll want to change that and make it smaller, like 0.2 of a second. At half a second it takes a little while for you to sit and wait for that to acquire. But since we're all learning, let's leave it at half a second. And finally we've got a thing called the G key, a datum. And I'll demonstrate the G key to you. I'm not going to talk about the smart edge or the distance at this point. So OK on that. And back to a top plan view. And fit to objects. So there we are. So I've got the snaps that I like. So that allows me to snap to that corner, snap to the top, and the smart points are the ones that allow me to have those extension lines. They are very useful. I can snap there, I can snap there, I can snap there. Also I can snap halfway between those two. So if I've got a line over here, choosing my line tool, and a line there, I need to mirror something, and I need to mirror it exactly halfway. What's an easy way to do it? Using the mirror tool, touch that point there, touch that point there, and exactly halfway in between I get a little vertical bar. There it is there, that's my midpoint. So I can draw a line midway between those other two. I can get rid of that now. So when I'm drawing, there are some keyboard shortcuts that are really useful. For example, I'm going to draw another rectangle on top of these ones that I've already drawn. And it's hard to see the ones that are underneath. We know they're there. Look, we can sort of see them as ghost forms, but we can't select them. How do we do that? If we hold down the B key, B for Bravo, you can see right through that object. This is fantastic when you're working on a project with lots of stuff on top of it. You can hold down the B key, you can see right through everything. Because now I can select that rectangle even though it's hiding underneath this bigger one. If I try to do that without the B key, it always selects the one on top. So hold down the B key, click, and I can select that one. B key again, select that one. B key again, I can select that one. So it makes it really useful, the B key. When I've got two objects that line up with each other, if I move near them, you'll see my cursor shows a little asterisk. This tells me that there are coincident objects. If I hold down the J key and click, Vectorworks will show me those objects. The top one is a rectangle, the one underneath is also a rectangle, and I can select either both of them, or I can just select one of them. So I can select that one, I can select that one, or I can select both. And that's another way to select objects that are underneath. Let's get rid of that. Now sometimes when I'm drawing dimensions, I need to zoom into a corner of my object. Now I can use my scroll wheel on my mouse. I can zoom in. I can use my zoom tool here if I need to zoom in. But both of those methods make it awkward for me because I have to zoom in, then I have to zoom out again. And if I hold down the mouse wheel button, it turns to the pan tool and I can pan my view around. But one of the really cool tricks is to hit the Z or the Z key. Go to the corner you want to go to, hit the Z or the Z key. It's a temporary zoom. So this temporary zoom is fantastic when you're dimensioning because it allows you just to zoom in temporarily. As soon as you click, that will go away. So in this lesson, we learned how to select and deselect objects. We learned how to use keyboard shortcuts to speed up drawing. We learned how to use snapping in Vectorworks. And we learned how to control snaps and the snapping palette.